All right. A couple of things. One is I want to chat a little bit about that CIIL acronym. That is a product of Pastor Carter of Newark. I always mention that because I don't want to plagiarize or, be accused of stealing something like that. But, a couple of, I think I mentioned previously, but couple of years back, one of my grad students worked for Pastor Carter, and we were discussing something, and she said, "Well, instead of doing a typical or traditional final project, how about if I bring in a speaker?" And I'm thinking to myself, "Speaker, let's see." You know, so put it off a little bit, but eventually she said, "Look, he's really willing to come in and speak to the group." And I said, "On leadership?" And she said, "Yeah." So I said, "All right, bring the guy in." So one night in walks this very elegant looking gentleman with, a colleague or two, I mean, bodyguard, I think is probably more accurate, but, colleague anyway. And, he made the comment, he said, anything you want me to avoid, avoid speaking about or anything. And I said, look, only thing I'd say is, remember this is not church on Sunday, so, a lot of different, faiths to consider, including some that perhaps, take the position none at all. And I said, so I just prefer not to overtly offend anyone. But I said, aside from that, I'm not, going to restrict what you say. You say what you got to say. And he got up and I kind of made the story up a little bit, but in I, I guess this was excuse me, about mid-semester, and he started speaking and everything, and I tell the story, and it's not really true. It's somewhat true. But in his first 15 minutes, he destroyed the first 6 months of work that I did talking about leadership and a bunch of things. Now that's not really true, but he put a great emphasis on this thing that I've used ever since, and I always remember to give him credit, this CIIL. And the shorter version of the story is something like the four items that this acronym represents: charisma, intelligence, integrity, and then something called the lid, is really a pretty good cornerstone and summative, cornerstone for leadership, certainly in a very general or generic sense. At least that's my view. My, in quotes, considered opinion. And and I've mentioned it before, but we can all pick leaders that we thought were charismatic. A lot of people thought that Bill Clinton had great charisma, and I suppose he did. A lot of people thought that Barack Obama had great charisma, and I suppose he did. I'm older than all of you, probably older than many of you put together, but my I like to say my president was JFK, way back in the day, John Kennedy. And he certainly, if you watch some of the old press conferences and everything, this guy certainly had charisma. And it's one of those things, and I have the PowerPoints up there, so you guys can flip through. But it's charisma is one of those things that you can't really fake. There's nothing worse than somebody trying to fake being likable, being charismatic, and so forth. And some people are just better at it than others. The CFO for our university, this guy Brian Kirkpatrick, very charismatic guy. I mean, he's the type of person that when you meet him and he holds out his hand and you shake hands with this guy and he makes eye contact. I mean, it's all about you, and he has that ability to make you feel like this is this is your moment. This is about you. The rest of the world gets shut out. And whether that's good or bad, I'm not certain. Not my position to normatize, or I'm certainly not the arbiter of whether that would be the greatest thing or not. But charisma certainly is an important element. that's intuitive. I think we know that. The other two become a bit more, I think, controversial. The idea of integrity. Okay, so that can be some people create this environment that integrity is trust and trust is well, okay. Well, I would have to presume a lot to say yes to something like that. Not saying no, but it's probably a little more involved in that. And over the short semester, we'll probably get a chance to put some meat on the bones there. But integrity's a big factor, and I think it ties into charisma in a lot of different ways. Um, there is an argument among academics that suggests that, in part, and the short version, of course, is that leadership is, nothing more than getting people to see your vision and want to follow. Well, that's probably legit as many other things. Certainly sounds good when you say it fast. Now, trying to operationalize that becomes something different. But the idea of integrity, and then the other one, and this is probably the controversial one a little bit, because I guess I could find a fancy way to say it, but I'll just phrase it as it just pisses some people off. We don't like to be told no, I believe, generally speaking, as a society. We don't like to be told that there could be somebody, a greater skill set or, in quotes, better than we are, and so forth. So this idea of intelligence, so charisma, and whichever eye you take first, but integrity, intelligence. So the intelligence thing, well, the measure of that supposedly has been this IQ thing. Now, is that measuring how smart we are? No, that's not what IQ is. And it's pretty well settled that the IQ you're born with, with a little bit of fluctuation, pretty much stays that way throughout life. And some argue that IQ is really a measure not of learning and not of how smart you are, but it's about your capacity to learn. That's at least one of the arguments that's put forth. Uh, the EQ thing, this emotional quotient, emotional intelligence. Well, that's the one that grows and changes and is all over the place. So I guess, strictly speaking, and looking at the idea of charisma, we got that part. Integrity, it's pretty intuitive. I think we have that part. The intelligence thing, in a way, it's kind of telling us that, because since we're little kids, oh, you can be anything you want. You can be president. You can be a senator. Whatever you think is, some lofty thing. Um, in a sense, we're being told, no, no, that's not true. No, you can't. They're in quotes, not my quote. So don't go writing your Congress people. But in quotes, there are no dumb leaders. Well, okay. I could probably sit here the rest of the evening and barely scratch the surface, but that's a separate discussion. But I guess the point that's being made is intelligence is a, key criteria. And I guess it gets supported sometimes. And big author of a lot of psychological study and so forth. And is this guy, David Dunning, written books, papers, and so forth. But I guess the intelligence thing, it's almost like a Michael Jordan thing, and I always use the analogy, or Steph Curry, whomever you think might be, a great athlete. I could spend the rest of my days, go to the gym every single day and do this, and try and hit, from the top of the key or half court or whatever, because Steph Curry seems to be able to do it all. I could do that for the rest of my, and I'm never, ever, ever, ever going to be a Steph Curry or a Michael Jordan. Okay. Well, I guess then, and that's probably a cheap example, but I guess it kind of underlines or accentuates the point that, look, not everybody can do everything well. Hence, not everybody can be a leader. I poke fun, and I, probably should poke a little less fun, but, I I'm too old to, worry about some of that stuff. But one of the people that was kind of my right hand when I was building an MBA program at a previous institution, everything ended up working for Wells Fargo. And so after, working for me for years and everything, he went off to do this, and I'd periodically call and touch base. Hey, what's going on? How's everything? Oh, that's great. This is happening. That's happening. I have a meeting with my leader at 5 o'clock. And I kind of, excuse me, I mean, the branch manager? No, my leader, the leader, the regional vice president? No, no. Oh, that's somebody, my leader, your leader. I guess I probably shouldn't underscore this as much as I do, but it makes me, I'd say crazy, but it's really crazier that somebody really thinks they're a leader because they're so absorbed with the title. I'm not sure who came up with that idea, but somebody like that, in my view, should be tied to the railroad tracks instantly. Let Metro North do the rest. Um, that's bizarre. That's bizarre. Full stop. Let me move on from that point. The last thing that Pastor Carter mentioned, so CIIL, charisma, intelligence, integrity, the lid. And he used the analogy of a teapot, and I think I mentioned this previously, and if not, well, so use the analogy of a teapot that you can fill the pot and keep putting stuff in and putting stuff in and putting stuff in, right up to the very top, right up to the lid, and eventually it's the vessel is not going to hold anymore, and the stuff just falls out all over the place. And I'll give you the shorter version because again, he did this over about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I tell the story that, again, he undid about 6 months worth of work in that 2 hours, first 15 minutes, actually. Really good guy, very smart guy. But this lid is the idea, and again, I use this frequently, that if you walked out of the school of business, tonight, tomorrow night, whenever, and there was somebody digging a, pipe broke and somebody's out there with a shovel, digging and hollers down, hey, you want to learn how to run one of these? And of course, we'd probably, 90 some odd percent, I would guess, of us would turn around, chuckle, and no thanks, I got dinner to get to, or whatever it is. Well, I guess the, in quotes, right, and I'm normatizing and I wouldn't let you get away with it, but I'm old. I'll use that excuse. So the right answer would probably be yes. And simply why? Well, because again, as in quotes, a leader, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know certainly what you're going to need in any given moment in time. This idea of improvisational leadership that I write a lot about, and I've submitted papers to conferences and so forth, has an awful lot to do with the fact that, leadership today, same thing, management, finance, a lot of other areas, but leadership today is not like, consensus building. Now, it's nice to build consensus, get everybody's input and so forth, but you know what? That takes time. And we look at the environment in which we operate, and time is the one commodity that is very constrained. So, leaders have to make decisions, decisions, in an environment of great uncertainty. And importantly, the outcome has to be right. Well, how do we do that? Well, again, David Dunning would argue, and I'm paraphrasing severely, I'm slaughtering David Dunning here, but David Dunning might argue that, you don't know what you don't know. But importantly, two things. One, you don't know what you might need to know, certainly in a leadership capacity. But he also argues that the very essence of the capacity to be able to recognize that you don't know what you don't know and do something meaningful about it is a skill set that most people that don't know just lack anyway. So for whatever that's worth. So the idea of lit is kind of the aggregate capacity of our learning, our ability to absorb, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I've had on my website for a long time, not since I started, in higher ed, but not far after, um, was a George Bernard Shaw quote that says something like, I'm not a teacher, I'm only a fellow traveler of whom you asked the way, and I pointed ahead of me as well as you. In other words, I can only take you so far. And hopefully, if I've contributed anything, and look, I'm never going to change the world, but I'm not averse to putting my thumbprint on it in a few places. Um, if I've done anything, it's to get you beyond me. And so that I think is, one of the important, uh, inputs, or certainly thoughts about this idea of lit. Pastor Carter, and when you get old, you forget stuff, but read his biography if you get a chance. And it's, Pastor Joseph A. Carter, the New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey. And if you're unfamiliar with that, if you remember Whitney Houston, that's where Whitney Houston and subsequently her daughter, but that's where Whitney's funeral was held. And one of the things that Pastor Carter mentioned the night that he was with us, he said, leadership sometimes is a hard thing because you have to be able, be willing certainly, but be able to, say no to some folks that, it's probably not the wisest thing in the world to say no to some of these people. And he used the idea that when Whitney Houston passed, of course, there were so many people that wanted to get up and speak, wanted to be part of the service, and so forth. And he said, look, you just can't do that. You've got to pick and choose who's going to be there. And at the time, while choosing not to attend in person, the President of the United States sent a letter that he wanted read at Whitney Houston's funeral. And Pastor Carter said, nope, nope. If you want to be here, you'll be here. And if you come, certainly out of respect for your position, etc., you'll be given the opportunity to speak. But to send a letter and want me or somebody else to read this, no, we're not doing that. And of course, there were a long list of people, more local people, something a little bit less stature than the Prez, but and he had to say no to a bunch of people. And he said that's a hard thing to do sometimes, but that's what, in his words, leadership required at the time. One of the things that, before I forget, and then I want to get to a video, but one of the things I wanted to, but anyway, look at, Pastor Carter of, he started when he was at the age of 9, accepted, we'll call it this calling to preach and so forth, and he's been at it ever since. But I mean, it's quite a remarkable story. One of the things that I want to get us, and I don't do homework, not really. I try hard not to because I'm not a believer in that. But we have such a short, constrained semester that what I want us to do is, I guess I'll use this analogy. When I was doing my graduate studies, especially doctoral studies, we had some rather very expensive books that we had to purchase. One was 400, one was 600, all of this. And I remember getting the syllabus and it said, read, and it had the title of the book. So I emailed the professor and I said, hey, Doc, I got the syllabus and it says read, and it has the title of the book. What specifically in the book do you want us to read? And so he called me and he got on the phone and he basically said, you're in grad school, the whole book. And okay, well, you got it. 10-4. And I never asked a question like that again. Well, I'm not doing that. But the things that are up in contents as you get around to it, because I don't do artificial deadlines either, read this by this date or otherwise don't submit it or a grade. That's nonsense. So I don't do that, but I do hope that you do get involved with some of the things that are in contents, just for your own knowledge and edification. And the point that I'm leading up to is that one of the things I want to discuss, and hopefully we can do it as soon as next week. We'll see how it goes. But I think one of the really great examples of leaders or leaders in action and leadership, and you guys won't remember this other than perhaps stories being told or a video that you've seen. Woodstock, well, there you go. Woodstock 1969. And there are a whole bunch of things about that. And, I'm not going to spoil it by discussing it tonight. But I'd like you to familiarize yourself with Woodstock and some of the easiest ways. And there were a couple, two or three really good videos about the original Woodstock. Some of them are on Prime. I have two or three of them on Prime. Some of them are on Netflix. Most of it you can actually find on YouTube. But familiarize yourself with, Michael Lang and a couple of the other, in quotes, founders, and so forth for Woodstock, and some of the things they had to contend with, and let's just call it the environment that they were in and they surrounded themselves with, and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit about that hopefully next week. Shifting gears once more, I hope you've had the opportunity to get a perspective on Jim Stockdale, Admiral James Stockdale. And again, whether you believe the wars are right or wrong or good or bad or, whatever is kind of less my point. And I'm certainly not the arbiter of any of that. And our job is not to normatize, but to analyze. So I'll repeat that a few dozen more times, I'm sure, during this short semester. But hopefully you got a perspective on Jim Stockdale. And I should tell you that I worked for him directly at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, some years after he, got back because the Vietnam War ended in 1975 and the prisoners were released, POWs were released a little bit before then, and, a year or so before then. And, he ended up with, pretty much choice of whatever he wanted to do in the Navy. And, so at one point he was president of the Naval War College. I was stationed there, so I worked for him, and we had the opportunity to chat about a lot of things, including, if you played the video, you understand the TAP code that he created and all of this. So we talked about that. So there's a couple of interesting dynamics that are not apparent in the video. And that was the video that I made available to everyone was the consolidated version. There are, I think, 7 or 8 individual video components, and maybe I'll make them available, that you can open and watch it. But I mean, that would take a lot of time. Full semester I used to do that, but the consolidated version is probably okay. All of that to say, as a segue into the video that I want to show this evening, this guy that I'm going to show was a huge motivational speaker, arguably a pretty good leader. And we'll put the meat on the bones, but let me see if I can get through this so we don't spend half the night, because I realize I've been chatting here for the last half hour. So let me see if the technology works here, and bear with me.
It's been almost 37 years to the day that I graduated from UT. I remember a lot of things about that day. I remember I had a throbbing headache from a party the night before. I remember I had a serious girlfriend who I later married. That's important to remember, by the way. And I remember I was getting commissioned in the Navy that day. But of all the things I remember, I don't have a clue who the commencement speaker was, and I certainly don't remember anything they said. So acknowledging that fact, if I can't make this commencement speech memorable, I will at least try to make it short. So the university's slogan is, "What starts here changes the world." Well, I've got to admit, I kind of like it. What starts here changes the world. Tonight, there are almost 8,000 students, or there are more than 8,000 students graduated from UT. So that great paragon of analytical rigor, Ask.com, says that the average American will meet 10,000 people in their lifetime. 10,000 people, that's a lot of folks. But if every one of you changed the lives of just 10 people, and each one of those people changed the lives of another 10 people, and another 10, then in 5 generations, 125 years, the class of 2014 will have changed the lives of 800 million people. 800 million people. Think about it. Over twice the population of the United States. Go one more generation, and you can change the entire population of the world, 8 billion people. If you think it's hard to change the lives of 10 people, change their lives forever, you're wrong. I saw it happen every day in Iraq and Afghanistan. A young Army officer makes a decision to go left instead of right down a road in Baghdad, and the 10 soldiers with him are saved from a close-in ambush. In Kandahar province, Afghanistan, a non-commissioned officer from the female engagement team senses that something isn't right and directs the infantry platoon away from a 500-pound IED, saving the lives of a dozen soldiers. But if you think about it, not only were those soldiers saved by the decisions of one person, but their children were saved, and their children's children. Generations were saved by one decision, one person. But changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it. So what starts here can indeed change the world. But the question is, what will the world look like after you change it? Well, I'm confident that it will look much, much better. But if you'll humor this old sailor for just a moment, I have a few suggestions that may help you on your way to a better world. And while these lessons were learned during my time in the military, I can assure you that it matters not whether you ever served a day in uniform. It matters not your gender, your ethnic or religious background, your orientation, or your social status. Our struggles in this world are similar, and the lessons to overcome those struggles and to move forward, changing ourselves and changing the world around us, will apply equally to all. I've been a Navy SEAL for 36 years, but it all began when I left UT for basic SEAL training in Coronado, California. Basic SEAL training is 6 months of long, torturous runs in the soft sand, midnight swims in the cold water off San Diego, obstacle courses, unending calisthenics, days without sleep, and always being cold, wet, and miserable. It is 6 months of being constantly harassed by professionally trained warriors who seek to find the weak of mind and body and eliminate them from ever becoming a Navy SEAL. But the training also seeks to find those students who can lead in an environment of constant stress, chaos, failure, and hardships. To me, basic SEAL training was a lifetime of challenges crammed into 6 months. So here are the 10 lessons I learned from basic SEAL training that hopefully will be of value to you as you move forward in life. Every morning in SEAL training, my instructors, who at the time were all Vietnam veterans, would show up in my barracks room, and the first thing they'd do was inspect my bed. If you did it right, the corners would be square, the covers would be pulled tight, the pillow centered just under the headboard, and the extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of the rack. It was a simple task, mundane at best, but every morning we were required to make our bed to perfection. It seemed a little ridiculous at the time, particularly in light of the fact that we were aspiring to be real warriors, tough, battle-hardened SEALs. But the wisdom of this simple act has been proven to me many times over. If you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task, and another, and another. And by the end of the day, that one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed. Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that the little things in life matter. If you can't do the little things right, you'll never be able to do the big things right. And if by chance you have a miserable day, you will come home to a bed that is made. that you made. And a made bed gives you encouragement that tomorrow will be better. So if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed.
5 words you pronounce wrong 2 years before your brain starts shutting down. Dementia is now known as type 3 diabetes.
During SEAL training, the students are all broken down into boat crews. Each crew is 7 students, 3 on each side of a small rubber boat, and 1 coxswain to help guide the dinghy. Every day, your boat crew forms up on the beach and is instructed to get through the surf zone and paddle several miles down the coast. In the winter, the surf off San Diego can get to be 8 to 10 feet high, and it is exceedingly difficult to paddle through the plunging surf unless everyone digs in. Every paddle must be synchronized to the stroke count of the coxswain. Everyone must exert equal effort, or the boat will turn against the wave and be unceremoniously dumped back on the beach. For the boat to make it to its destination, everyone must paddle. You can't change the world alone. You will need some help. And to truly get from your starting point to your destination takes friends, colleagues, the goodwill of strangers, and a strong coxswain to guide you. If you want to change the world, find someone to help you paddle. Over a few weeks of difficult training, my SEAL class, which started with 150 men, was down to just 42. There were now 6 boat crews of 7 men each. I was in the boat with the tall guys, but the best boat crew we had was made up of the little guys, the Munchkin crew, we called them. No one was over 5'5". The Munchkin boat crew had 1 American Indian, 1 African American, 1 Polish American, 1 Greek American, 1 Italian American, and 2 tough kids from the Midwest. They out-paddled, outran, and outswam all the other boat crews. The big men in the other boat crews would always make good-natured fun of the tiny little flippers the Munchkins put on their tiny little feet prior to every swim. But somehow these little guys from every corner of the nation and the world always had the last laugh, swimming faster than everyone and reaching the shore long before the rest of us. SEAL training was a great equalizer. Nothing mattered but your will to succeed, not your color, not your ethnic background, not your education, not your social status. If you want to change the world, measure a person by the size of their heart, not by the size of their flippers. Several times a week, the instructors would line up the class and do a uniform inspection. It was exceptionally thorough. Your hat had to be perfectly starched, your uniform immaculately pressed, your belt buckle shiny and void of any smudges. But it seemed that no matter how much effort you put into starching your hat or pressing your uniform or polishing your belt buckle, it just wasn't good enough. The instructors would find something wrong. For failing the uniform inspection, the student had to run, fully clothed, into the surf zone, then wet from head to toe, roll around on the beach until every part of your body was covered with sand. The effect was known as a sugar cookie. You stayed in the uniform the rest of the day, cold, wet, and sandy. There were many a student who just couldn't accept the fact that all their efforts were in vain, that no matter how hard they tried to get the uniform right, it went unappreciated. Those students didn't make it through training. Those students didn't understand the purpose of the drill. You were never going to succeed. You were never going to have a perfect uniform. The instructors weren't going to allow it. Sometimes, no matter how well you prepare or how well you perform, you still end up as a sugar cookie. It's just the way life is sometimes. If you want to change the world, get over being a sugar cookie and keep moving forward. Every day during training, you were challenged with multiple physical events: long runs, long swims, obstacle courses, hours of calisthenics, something designed to test your mettle. Every event had standards, times you had to meet. If you failed to meet those times, those standards, your name was posted on a list, and at the end of the day, those on the list were invited to a circus. A circus was 2 hours of additional calisthenics, designed to wear you down, to break your spirit, to force you to quit. No one wanted a circus. A circus meant that for that day, you didn't measure up. A circus meant more fatigue, and more fatigue meant that the following day would be more difficult, and more circuses were likely. But at some time during SEAL training, everyone made the circus list. But an interesting thing happened to those who were constantly on the list. Over time, those students who did 2 hours of extra calisthenics got stronger and stronger. The pain of the circuses built inner strength and physical resiliency. Life is filled with circuses. You will fail. You will likely fail often. It will be painful. It will be discouraging. At times, it will test you to your very core. But if you want to change the world, don't be afraid of the circuses. At least twice a week, the trainees were required to run the obstacle course. The obstacle course contained 25 obstacles, including a 10-foot wall, a 30-foot cargo net, a barbed wire crawl, to name a few. But the most challenging obstacle was the Slide for Life. It had a 3-level, 30-foot tower at one end and a 1-level tower at the other. In between was a 200-foot long rope. You had to climb the 3-tiered tower, and once at the top, you grabbed the rope, swung underneath the rope, and pulled yourself hand over hand until you got to the other end. The record for the obstacle course had stood for years when my class began in 1977. The record seemed unbeatable until one day a student decided to go down the Slide for Life head first. Instead of swinging his body underneath the rope and inching his way down, he bravely mounted the top of the rope and thrust himself forward. It was a dangerous move, seemingly foolish and fraught with risk. Failure could mean injury and being dropped from the course. Without hesitation, the student slid down the rope perilously fast. Instead of several minutes, it only took him half that time. And by the end of the course, he had broken the record. If you want to change the world, sometimes you have to slide down the obstacles head first. During the land warfare phase of training, the students are flown out to San Clemente Island, which lies off the coast of San Diego. The waters off San Clemente are a breeding ground for the great white sharks. To pass SEAL training, there are a series of long swims that must be completed. One is the night swim. Before the swim, the instructors joyfully brief the students on all the species of sharks that inhabit the waters off San Clemente. They assure you, however, that no student has ever been eaten by a shark, at least not that they can remember. But you are also taught that if a shark begins to circle your position, stand your ground. Do not swim away. Do not act afraid. And if the shark, hungry for a midnight snack, darts towards you, then summons up all your strength and punch him in the snout, and he will turn and swim away. There are a lot of sharks in the world. If you hope to complete the swim, you will have to deal with them. So if you want to change the world, don't back down from the sharks.
Take a look at this kid holding a smartphone. You might think it's just innocent screen time, but there's an invisible threat you need to know about.
As Navy SEALs, one of our jobs is to conduct underwater attacks against enemy shipping. We practice this technique extensively during training. The ship attack mission is where a pair of SEAL divers is dropped off outside an enemy harbor and then swims well over 2 miles underwater, using nothing but a depth gauge and a compass to get to the target. During the entire swim, even well below the surface, there is some light that comes through. It is comforting to know that there is open water above you. But as you approach the ship, which is tied to a pier, the light begins to fade. The steel structure of the ship blocks the moonlight. It blocks the surrounding street lamps. It blocks all ambient light. To be successful in your mission, you have to swim under the ship and find the keel, the center line, and the deepest part of the ship. This is your objective. But the keel is also the darkest part of the ship, where you cannot see your hand in front of your face, where the noise from the ship's machinery is deafening, and where it gets to be easily disoriented, and you can fail. Every SEAL knows that under the keel, at that darkest moment of the mission, is a time when you need to be calm, when you must be calm, when you must be composed, when all your tactical skills, your physical power, and your inner strength must be brought to bear. If you want to change the world, you must be your very best in the darkest moments. The 9th week of training is referred to as Hell Week. It is 6 days of no sleep, constant physical and mental harassment, and one special day at the Mud Flats. The Mud Flats are an area between San Diego and Tijuana where the water runs off and creates the Tijuana Sloughs, a swampy patch of terrain where the mud will engulf you. It is on Wednesday of Hell Week that you paddle down to the Mud Flats and spend the next 15 hours trying to survive the freezing cold, the howling wind, and the incessant pressure to quit from the instructors. As the sun began to set that Wednesday evening, my training class, having committed some egregious infraction of the rules, was ordered into the mud. The mud consumed each man till there was nothing visible but our heads. The instructors told us we could leave the mud if only 5 men would quit. Only 5 men, just 5 men, and we could get out of the oppressive cold. Looking around the mud flat, it was apparent that some students were about to give up. It was still over 8 hours till the sun came up. 8 more hours of bone-chilling cold. The chattering teeth and the shivering moans of the trainees were so loud, it was hard to hear anything. And then one voice began to echo through the night. One voice raised in song. The song was terribly out of tune, but sung with great enthusiasm. One voice became 2, and 2 became 3, and before long, everyone in the class was singing. The instructors threatened us with more time in the mud if we kept up the singing, but the singing persisted. And somehow the mud seemed a little warmer, and the wind a little tamer, and the dawn not so far away. If I have learned anything in my time traveling the world, it is the power of hope. The power of one person, a Washington, a Lincoln, King, Mandela, and even a young girl from Pakistan, Malala. One person can change the world by giving people hope. So if you want to change the world, start singing when you're up to your neck in mud. Finally, in SEAL training, there's a bell. A brass bell that hangs in the center of the compound for all the students to see. All you have to do to quit is ring the bell. Ring the bell, and you no longer have to wake up at 5 o'clock. Ring the bell, and you no longer have to be in the freezing cold swims. Ring the bell, and you no longer have to do the runs, the obstacle course, the PT, and you no longer have to endure the hardships of training. All you have to do is ring the bell to get out. If you want to change the world, don't ever, ever ring the bell. To the class of 2014, you are moments away from graduating, moments away from beginning your journey through life, moments away from starting to change the world for the better. It will not be easy, but you are the class of 2014, the class that can affect the lives of 800 million people in the next century. Start each day with a task completed. Find someone to help you through life. Respect everyone. Know that life is not fair and that you will fail often. But if you take some risks, step up when the times are the toughest, face down the bullies, lift up the downtrodden, and never ever give up, if you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today. And what started here will indeed have changed the world for the better. Thank you very much. Hook 'em horns.
Let's call a timeout against hate together.
Oh, what do you think?
Powerful video. I've seen it before actually, but I love it.
Okay. Yeah.
Professor, it was a lot of layers to that. Definitely.
True.
I mean, I know that we all have our own battles, but being a black man and listening to that and all the obstacles that we continue to go as a race, it rains so much more than I can imagine. And I'm just like, he was building and building and building. I'm like, yeah, I understand. You know what I'm saying? So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, Professor.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
was
Go ahead.
I was going to say that yeah, I've seen that before. And did I hear that you were in the Navy?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, I was in the Navy for 8 years myself. So yeah, I definitely heard that one before. But really, what I get from that or from similar speeches like that is like perseverance, grit is probably the most important. Just never giving up.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I did 8 years as well. I mean, it was, I had some great duty. That's for another conversation. But yeah, other other thoughts on this? There was a guy that, and I tell this story often too, so I'm not sure if I had previously mentioned this, but it was Dr. Ralph Grant, Ralph Thomas Grant Jr. And at a point, and this goes back in history a little bit, not all that far, but at a point he was president of the city council in Newark, and he was on the city council there for I think it was 26 years. And he was there when Kenny Gibson was the second black mayor in this country of a major city. First was in Detroit, and I'm, not here to talk about Detroit, but when Kenny Gibson was mayor, Ralph Grant was president of the city council. And among, the other things, and the, you'll never be able to, and you can't this, and you can't that. The reason, or certainly a big part of the reason you see the Prudential building in Newark, well, that's Ralph Grant and Kenny Gibson and a few other major firms as well. Ralph Grant, I know it's hard to envision that there might be somebody older than me, but Ralph Grant is substantially older than I am. And he grew up in, in the, how should I phrase this, the old American South. And, while some of us, all of us, a few of us, read about King, have seen speeches about King and everything. Well, Ralph Grant was one of those that knew him, that marched with him, not every single event, and so forth. Ralph Grant was not, Abernathy or, as he put it, Jesse Sterling Silver Jackson or any of that stuff. But he told me a story once, and I guess when he was a kid, and as poor as they were and so forth, his mother would never let them go out of the house, looking, how should I say it, kind of schlocky or anything like that. Always had to be dressed, and of course the phrase or the phraseology was, just because you're poor doesn't mean you have to act poor or doesn't have to look poor and so forth. And Ralph, after school, would go to work, and at this point, and it's a bit of old age, I knew the pharmacist's name at one point, and I no longer remember that. But he worked for a pharmacy, and his job was to deliver prescriptions. And I guess people would, either send in, back then, there was not the telecommunications capacity that you have today, but either a message would go to the pharmacy. I think there was, a very primitive landline and all of this kind of stuff, the pot lines, plain old telephone lines and so forth, like I had growing up. And the owner would have Ralph and two or three other kids with their bicycles, or walk, but Ralph had a bicycle. And their job, which paid apparently very well for what it was at the time, and I don't think he ever told me the dollar amount, but he said it paid very well. Their job was to deliver the scripts. And so the pharmacist, had the habit, and the pharmacist, was an old white guy. And of course, Ralph and some of his colleagues were young black men. I probably should say boys because they were very young, but I mean, I don't mean that in any kind of a negative or disrespectful way. So I'll go with young men, but I think it was like kind of, in between, when are you a young man versus a little kid or a little boy or something, that kind of thing. But he told me that the pharmacist used to come around, and they'd hang out in back of the pharmacy and he'd holler out the back, but he wouldn't call them by their name. He would holler out the first letter of their name. So I don't know, he wanted Billy to deliver a particular prescription. They'd holler out B. And of course, kid come running and we give him take this over to, whomever, Mrs. Jones, I don't know, whatever the hell it was. And so he'd do this and it'd get to Ralph and his R. And it really bothered Ralph, because he said, look, I was given a name. My name is Ralph Thomas Grant Jr. And I'll shorten the story because, so this would go on and this would go on. One day, Ralph shows up for work. And as he explained it to me, and again, I grew up fatherless and dirt poor in Passaic, New Jersey, but that's still nothing like what Ralph experienced growing up. So I don't want to pretend to know anything. But apparently, it was a pretty dangerous thing to do to challenge some old established white guy if you were a young black kid in the old South. And so, one day the guy comes out the back, R. Comes walking out of the back, goes up to Ralph and says, I just called you. Ralph looked at him and he, turned on his heels, stood tall in front of him. Ralph was a little bit taller than me. I guess that'd make him about 6'2" or something like that. Turned on his heels, looked at the guy, and he says, my name is Ralph Thomas Grant Jr. You will address me by my name. And of course, the guy, was incensed. And Ralph turned to him and basically said, I quit. Now, this was apparently a decently paying job, hard to come by and all of this stuff. Well, the long story short is that the next day, pharmacist, early in the morning, goes to Ralph's house, and speaks to his mother. Says, where's Ralph? Well, Ralph's at school. Says, would you please ask him to come see me? Give me a sec. Please ask him to come see me after school. And I'll give you the very short version because that's as good as I can do tonight. Ralph went there. The guy apologized, and Ralph had basically, made a name for himself. A lot of guts, a lot of character, a lot of integrity. That stayed with Ralph his entire life. And if you ever met him, he was one of the most well-dressed, elegant, elegantly spoken individuals, gentlemen, you would ever want to meet. Extraordinary, given the background and his upbringing. Ralph was my mentor when I started in higher ed. And when we talk about leadership, there was not a finer person. I got to get off that story. Sorry. Sometimes you think you're past things. I guess maybe not always. So, all right. It's getting late. It's 9 o'clock. I don't want to go much longer than this. What I would like us to do is do a little bit of digging on Woodstock 69. I have a couple more videos and a couple of things I'd like to share. Some of those I will post on Contents, and I'll add a couple of things to the announcements and the message board. But it's been an hour, and I promised that I'd keep it to something like an hour most nights. That's not going to happen every night because, again, it's a short semester, but we will do that tonight. So with that, questions, issues, concerns? Okay, hearing none. Blessings to all. Be safe. Do a little bit of reading as you get to it, and we'll chat during the week and see you next week. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Good night, Professor.
Good night,
Good night, everybody.